Back in 1983 I had a girlfriend who lived in Southern California. Being smitten and a gentleman, I agreed to drive her home from Utah after the end of the school semester. The only problem was that I owned a Fiat Bi 1/9, one of the worst sports cars ever made, prone to both overheating and fan belt-related breakdowns. I knew the car could never handle a drive across the Nevada deserts during the day with the air conditioner running, and my princess of a girlfriend wasn't about to go anywhere without her AC. So an all-night drive, about 10+ hours, was proposed. So we set out. Normally I carried a spare fan belt or two with me because they broke constantly. But this time I didn't have one. Changing a belt in this mid-engine monstrosity of Italian engineering was an ordeal, 45 minutes of grunting from underneath the jacked-up car. Only a mechanic could do it using a jack that raised the car high enough to allow him access. Sure enough, the main belt driving the water pump broke around 2 a.m. somewhere between Barstow and Baker in the most god-forsaken stretch of barren interstate in the entire West, where there are few exits and even fewer services. The Mojave Desert, land of the infamous ZZYZX Road and similar abandoned haunts and ghost towns. It's close to Death Valley where travelers have been collapsing and dying for 160 years. It is not a place to stop, let alone break down. They make horror movies about this stretch of road. I'm not exactly sure where the car broke down because this was in the days before GPS and before cell phones, and it was raining and a little foggy, and to be honest I was more than a little dozy when it broke. Those of you who know this stretch of highway know that it's about the worst possible place to break down. No services, no people, and about 45-minute drive to the nearest town. And we break down at 2 a.m. on a Sunday, no less. We were screwed. When you break a belt in the Fiat you have about 3 minutes of driving before coolant erupts in steamy geyser. You simply must stop. So I pull over at my first opportunity, which is just after the off-ramp to one of many, no services, exits in this stretch of road. Just missed it. But we decide to get out and walk back along the side of the freeway a couple of 100 yards up the exit ramp where in the distance we could see a lights-off, closed gas station. I was not about to leave the girl in the car alone because, wouldn't you know it, this was the era of the infamous I-5 freeway serial killer. As we walked back up the side of the freeway, the lights of the oncoming traffic illuminated the roadway, and every so often it seemed to us that something on the road was moving. Wriggling to be more precise. We couldn't exactly make out what these wriggling things were until we got close to one just as another semi-truck roared by. Yup. You guessed it. Desert rattlesnakes were coming out of the sand and onto the warm asphalt in the aftermath of the freak summer shower. That was it for the walking. We hopped, skipped and jumped back to the car, and radiator be damned I drove it in reverse back up the freeway ramp to the closed gas station, rolling right over the tops of any slithering snakes in our way, and swooping under the large gas station overhang just as my radiator boiled over again and it began to piss down rain. A rainstorm in early summer in the Mojave Desert. Do you have any idea how unlikely that is? But our night of weirdness had just begun. The abandoned gas station was straight out of a 50s movie. It was almost Hitchcockian, to be frank. It had a timeless, but closed many years, feel to it. Dust was on the countertops and the Naugahyde booths inside the cafe, but it was not really run down. It still looked great, just closed. I also remember a large, formerly neon-lit road sign that said, "Eats," standing a few dozen yards from the building. As for who ate what, I didn't want to guess. We tried the front door, but it was locked, maybe for years. Fortunately, right there next to the front door was a pay phone, and scratched into the enamel paint of the pay phone housing was a phone number that said, "Broke down. Call 555-1111," etc. I picked up the phone and to my surprise, it still worked. So I call the number. A sleepy man answers. We tell him that we don't know where we are on I-15 exactly, but we saw his scratched message on the phone and called. He says, "Never mind. I know where you are, I'll be right out." 40 minutes later, we were drifting in and out of sleep, huddled in the car and trying to keep warm against the unusual chill of the wet desert night when a bearded guy rolls up in a tow truck to pull us into town. Imagine a Zach Galifianakis type, only a bit less weird. He sees the Fiat and says, "Lemme guess, broken pump belt." "How did you know?" I answered. "Because I just did another of these Fiats last week. Belts break all the time. They are a bitch to fix. But at least I know what I'm doing this time. The only trouble is, I don't have a spare belt on me. I'll have to go into Barstow to get it. It'll take about an hour and a half to get back here with it." Which is what he proceeds to do. We get back in our car to wait an hour and a half for him to come back. Only then do we think about how we're going to pay the guy. We're college kids, we don't have credit cards. We check our wallets and purses, and between the two of us we find two 20s. That's it, nothing more. $40. We realize that this is not nearly enough for a middle-of-the-night service call with fan belt included. Not even in 1983. We decide to say nothing to the mechanic and only cross that bridge when we come to it. Repentance is easier than permission. We drift in and out of sleep again while we wait. He returns at just after 4 a.m. with the belt and jacks up the car. He struggles a bit with the installation, but after about 30 minutes, a new record, he finishes and drops the car. It's still pitch black and he still has a 45-minute drive home in front of him. Only then do we ask him what we owed him for this service call that has lasted 3.5 hours in the middle of a Sunday night. He scratches his beard for a moment and says, $40 should cover it. Thunderstruck at our good fortune, we pay him and drive off. We get to the girl's house about 7 a.m. and I drop her off. After a rest, I turn around and start driving back. I stop at my uncle's house in Victorville where I borrow some money and tell him the story. He insists that I must look up the mechanic again and give him more money. I tell him that I didn't write down his number, but it was scratched in the paint at the gas station. He says, "No problem. Just stop at the same gas station on the way back and look up his number again." So this is what I set out to do. In the daylight this time and well rested, I pulled off every exit between Barstow and Baker on I-15, crossed over to the north side and looked for the gas station where I had just spent the night and had my car fixed by the mysterious bearded mechanic. The only problem is, I never find it. I didn't even find anything that looked close to it. Oh sure, there were a few gas stations there, some abandoned and some operating. And some of these are still there. But none of them resembled the 1950s shop with the "Eats" sign swaying in the breeze that I remembered from just a few nights before. Whenever the upcoming exit felt like it might have been the right one, I would pull off and there would be nothing there. And when I could see actual buildings off another promising exit, and I would pull off for a closer look, they wouldn't turn out to be the right buildings. And even in those cases when the buildings didn't look right, I still always stopped and checked for a payphone by the front door. I never found any payphone by any front door, let alone one with numbers scratched in the paint. Trust me, I checked all the possible buildings that whole stretch of road because the thing started to weird me out. I have long since accepted that I may have been wrong about many of memories of that night because I was tired and probably scared and visibility was poor with the rain and the mist. But the one thing I am sure of was that I had called a mechanic from a payphone by the door of a closed gas station next to the LA-bound side of the freeway and he had come and fixed me. In fact, I still check those exits to this day, every time I drive between Vegas and LA. The last time I did so was in December 2015. And I just checked them all again on Google Street View, which you can do for yourself. That gas station is simply not there. I don't know what's weirder. The fact that the gas station isn't there or the thought of a bearded mechanic who would work through the night on a weekend for just $40. You decide. Meanwhile, if you should ever happen to break down in the middle of the night in the Mojave Desert near ZZYZX Road, don't worry so much. Somebody will be along by and by. I've spent the last 15 years trying to wrap my head around this one. I was about 15 years old when this happened. One afternoon, I was home alone after school. My dad and stepmom were working. I was feeling a little uncomfortable in the house. It's hard to describe. Maybe it was a sixth sense. But for some reason, I didn't want to be alone in the house. Whenever I felt like this and was home, alone, I'd bring my Rottweiler, my bestie, Shaddai inside to keep me company. I brought Shaddai in and felt a little better with him by my side. He laid down on the floor to my right. Behind me, to the right, were the stairs leading to the upstairs bedrooms. Behind me and to my left was the front door. I still couldn't shake the uneasy feeling and started playing video games to distract myself. After all, I was at home, it was late afternoon, the sun was shining outside, and there was no logical reason for me to feel uneasy. Just as I was getting lost in the game, I heard a deep, low growl. Grr, grr. I paused the game and looked over at Shaddai. He was still laying down, but growling menacingly. He picked his head up, ears at attention, his hair rising along his haunches. I followed his gaze over my shoulder to the base of the stairs and saw nothing. I looked back at him. He was very clearly looking right at something and not liking what he saw. He charged at the base of the stairs, growling, snapping, and barking. I watched him from a state of shock, unsure of what to do. Remember, I was home alone, so I thought, WTF. I got up and ran to the kitchen to grab a knife. All the while, Shaddai was snarling at the base of the steps, standing with his paws on the first steps barking up. My logical mind was thinking that maybe someone was in the house. With goosebumps and my hair standing on ends, I was also thinking that maybe it was something else. With the knife in my right hand and holding Shaddai by the collar with my left, I started to creep up the 3 or 4 steps to the landing to see if maybe I could see feet or something without going all the way up the stairs. Just as I reached the landing, bam! My room door slammed shut. I bolted down the stairs and out the front door. I had my cell phone, so I hysterically called my dad to tell him everything that happened and that I was not going back in until he got home. At this point, I was thoroughly spooked. Shaddai, however, was back to normal. I sat on the sidewalk with Shaddai for about an hour until my dad got home, then we both cautiously entered. I stayed downstairs while he went into his room upstairs and retrieved his firearm. Then, he headed to my bedroom, which was still closed. When he tried to open my door, he found it locked. We had to break the handle on my room door to get in. Once inside, we found nothing out of place and no one in the room. No open window, nothing that could explain the door slamming shut on its own. I will add that none of the windows or doors in the house were open. I've had other unusual experiences and dreams, but nothing as palpable as this one. Interestingly, back then, whenever I would dream of Shaddai, he was always a dark-skinned boy of 13 or 14 and he never spoke, but had the same eyes as he did in real life. He would walk by my side just like the real Shaddai. And in my dreams, I never found it odd that he wasn't a dog until I woke up. Years later, when I was in my early 20s, Shaddai developed severe hip dysplasia and we had to put him down. Rest easy, my boy.